So this is my dissemination project for my environmental problems in society class. I'm going to be talking about biodiversity loss and the crisis behind it. So pretty much what it is, what has caused it, and how we can fix it, essentially. So the crisis itself, like anything, the planet has boundaries to its resources and it has a limit as to how many modifications can happen to it. A number of the boundaries that the planet has set are being crossed, and this is causing a lot of problems in our Earth systems. Planetary boundary is a human-induced alteration to the Earth's subsystem, and they have the potential to shift the Earth into a totally different state. Okay. And there are two different types of system change processes, one being changeable and the other one being unsafe or harmful to the Earth. The one that's changeable is what we call the tipping point or the threshold. This is a state in which, if exceeded, it can create uncontrollable and nonlinear, so unclear cause and effect, and unknowable changes in larger biological, chemical, and physical systems. The unsafe rate of change within a system exceeds the system's ability to adjust or adapt to the changing conditions. So it loses its resilience and the ability to withstand and recover from disturbance or shock. So pretty much once it's hit the red zone, we pretty much can't go back. What's done is done, we can't undo it. So 2 of our 9 planetary boundaries have already hit the zone, beyond the zone of uncertainty, and those being the biosphere integrity, more specifically genetic diversity, and our biogeochemical flows, which are phosphorus and nitrogen. Meanwhile, four of the 9, including the biosphere integrity and biogeochemical flows, have already hit within the zone of uncertainty, so that would be the yellow right here. And those would be climate change and land system change. And when I say they're at the zone of uncertainty, I mean that these zones are at a high risk or at a risk for changing the Earth system. So the yellow would be we're kind of hitting the zone, we're kind of hitting an unsafe rate of change. So we're hitting the point where it's we can't undo what we've done. And the red means it's done, we can't do anything else about it. So yeah. So there are 5 main direct causes of biodiversity loss, and as of recent, they're almost entirely man-made. But if we can identify the threats and observe what it is that's exactly killing the biodiversity, we can formulate plans and actions to negate the effects that these threats have on them. The thing that most these threats can't or won't be stopped, they're almost all directly related to mankind's industry and economy, but that doesn't mean that we can't take action to help certain species of the world. So the first is probably the biggest cause of biodiversity loss, and that is habitat loss and general degradation. This happens as a direct result of man's industry completely changing the landscape where species might live and using it for mankind's benefit. So for example, taking down all the trees and using them for paper or log houses or whatever. We take this land, and with our changing of it, we destroy or remove key elements of survival for its natural occupants. And it's the equivalent of kicking somebody out of their home and pretty much forcing them to live into the streets. So we're taking just an animal's home pretty much just for our own gain, and normally that gain is not really needed, for example, if that makes sense. And yeah. So the second threat to biodiversity loss is direct exploitation of a species. This would pretty much be exploitation of a species for commercial use or recreational use. So this would be overindulging in hunting or poaching or overfishing. This has resulted in the near extinction of dozens of species of animals, and this leads to inhumane treatment of the animals in food factories, for example. So the third one is pollution, and pretty much everyone kind of knows what pollution is. It's not just an issue of new landfills destroying habitats, it's the effect of global warming accumulating so much greenhouse gas that it warms parts of the planet up, making survival there not possible for species who have been geographically tied to that area. This happens through oil spills, landfills, planetary warming, and in the rare case of like Fukushima or Chernobyl nuclear accidents, they can alter the reproductive organs of these creators and create deformities. So the fourth threat is invasive species. This is happening for a multitude of reasons, with some of them being natural, but most from man-made mistakes. This happens when we use up natural land for a multitude of reasons, such as agriculture, industry, or just using the resources from an area, and we rob the species living there for their food and or their homes. So now they must venture out and find a new place to live. That's pretty much what's happening there. So it's kind of like habitat loss and degradation, but we're forcing new animals to come into different habitats and kind of invade the habitat of other animals. So the last one is kind of, everyone kind of knows about it. It's climate change. The rise of the Earth's average temperature is forcing species out of their traditional climates and homes, and this relates back to the invasive species threat. In most cases, changing the natural way of things in any ecosystem is going to change or destroy that system's inhabitants' way of life, and the warming of the Earth is directly affecting reproductive aspects of some animals and things like land loss and invasive species, making climate change one of the more important aspects of finding solutions. So, a lot of the climate change that happens right now is like human induced. Like we've created our own like greenhouse gases, and we've created a lot of the climate change for ourselves. But climate change, it's like bound to happen, but we're speeding up the process, and this is kind of like, for example, like polar bears. They're kind of like, the ice caps are melting, their home is melting, so they need to find a new place to live, that kind of thing. So how bad is the situation? Right now, with our planetary boundaries, it isn't a massive problem, considering only 2 of the 9 are in like overshoot mode, which means like you can't go back from them. However, if we keep on doing what we're doing in regards to like pollution, human-induced climate change, the problem could become much worse, meaning that like more species could go into different habitats, that kind of thing. So for the structural drivers of it, a structural driver is something that is semi-permanent, but it's not entirely impossible to change over time. So when it comes about, there are three structural drivers. They're population growth, fossilized energy, and economic growth. But when it comes to biodiversity loss, we're more concerned about fossilized energy and population growth. Sorry. So for population growth, the growth of the population is causing us to create more infrastructure, so houses and cities and transport routes and stuff like that, and agricultural land, which can destroy habitats and cause animals to try and find a new one, so invasive species. When animals do this, it can cause a number of problems, so new diseases forming, competition between the species, etc. And the competition between species can mean that like certain species can die out as well, which means more extinctions. And then fossilized energy. So resource extraction, as well as the incineration of these resources, are causing harmful gases and particles to go into the air, which can actually hurt us. They can hurt like our lungs if we breathe in too many. And these particles correlate directly with the planetary boundary of biogeochemical flow, so phosphorus and nitrogen, which is already past the high risk mark. And the third structural driver is economic growth. This driver was created during the 1920s when the Industrial Revolution was occurring. And this was made possible by exploiting fossil fuel energy and taking advantage of it. Population growth and fossilized energy also play a key role in this, considering like the more population, the more the population grows, the more energy we need, which means more coal, oil, and natural gases come out of the earth. So this is the iceberg model. The iceberg model is essentially the level of thinking a person can do when thinking about or dealing with an event. So level 1 thinking would be your tip of the iceberg right here. And that's pretty much like reacting to a problem. So you identify the key event or the key problem, and you'd be asking yourself like, what happened, what's happened, you know, that kind of thing. Level 2 thinking would be right here, and that would be your patterns and your trends. So seeing the problem, recognizing the patterns of the events, behaviors, and decisions. And you'd be asking yourself questions like, has this happened before? Is it similar to any of the other world issues that we're facing, etc., etc. So level 3 thinking would be right here, and that would be developing a hypothesis about what's causing the pattern or the trend, or the root causes, and finding out what they have in common. This would draw in theories about the system and how it functions to influence a problem. Level 4 thinking would you would essentially be uncovering beliefs and assumptions. So why are the structures as organized as they are? What assumptions or beliefs about the world are the structures based on? That kind of thing. So how we think, so basically where we are on the iceberg model. When we're thinking about our biodiversity crisis, we tend to look at it from a level 2 way of thinking. So that would just be kind of looking at your trends and getting a bit more detail into why the biodiversity crisis is happening, but never really taking the leap to actually like helping to solve the issue. And the majority of us know that it's happening. So the majority of us know that like pollution and habitat loss and degradation, human-induced climate change, hunting, you know, etc. We know that these things are happening, but we never really, again, make a big stride in changing it. And yeah, that is my dissemination project. Do you have any questions?
Well, you mentioned a lot. You mentioned the idea of the 2 pieces that are already past being able to do anything about them, and there was 9 in total. And what do you recommend would be some good ways to potentially find a way to keep us from getting to that level with the other things? What are some ways we can maybe fix or help it so we don't hurt the environment as much as we are?
Well, basically when it comes to like the biogeochemical flows of, so like phosphorus and nitrogen, those are greenhouse gases. They're part of the ozone layer, and they're accumulating greenhouse gases, and they're causing the climate change to actually happen a bit more, because it just like our energy just kind of reflects off of it, and then it bounces back and it creates more heat for us. So what we could do in order for it to kind of diminish a little bit is to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases that we use, and like, so that would mean like less factories and basically just less machines to help or that make our goods.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's about it. Any more? No? Okay, that's it.